state and federal outreach. And I am also an associate professor in the Department of Human Ecology. I'm trained as a sociologist, so I'm kind of a social science, one of many. They're working on energy and climate change. And I'm very happy to introduce our next speakers. So I'm going to give 2 introductions. One of our speakers is on her way, and so we may do a little schedule adjustment. But our first speaker you will hear from is Kris Ohleth. She's worked in the offshore industry in the United States for 15 years, helping to develop the market for states for this renewable technology since its first inception. As the Director of Permitting and Stakeholder Relations for several offshore wind developers, she has gained critical insights into federal and state offshore wind regulations and processes. Kris has extensive experience with offshore wind stakeholders in the region and has expert knowledge of ocean planning, having worked on ocean policy and stakeholders at all levels from industry, state, and NGO perspectives. She's a New Jersey native, so we're having a very big homecoming here for REI this year, and she's a senior manager of stakeholder engagement at Ørsted North America right now. So Kris earned an undergraduate degree right here from Rutgers University, and got her master's degree at University of Rhode Island in coastal and ocean policy. She is on the board of the New Jersey Environmental Lobby and currently lives in Morris County with her husband and 3 rescued racing greyhounds. And I'm going to do the second introduction, and then Kris will come up. So our second speaker who's on her way is Kathleen Frangione, also a New Jersey native. At the beginning of this year, Kathleen was appointed acting chief of staff and chief policy advisor for Governor Phil Murphy. Previously, Frangione was an executive vice president for the policy and political consultancy for the Signal Group. Before that, she served as senior policy advisor on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee under then Senator John Kerry, acting as lead staffer on climate change issues. She also was a legislative staffer in Kerry's Senate office overseeing domestic and international environment, energy, and natural resource issues. Kathleen is a graduate of Harvard College and holds a master's from Yale, but is a native of Rumson and has got to move back home. Lives there with her husband and 2 children. So with that, I will hand it off to Kris.
Okay, I have my both microphones. Well, welcome this morning, and I was glad to hear the anecdote about rain and good luck a little earlier because one of those hurricanes that Scott mentioned a little earlier, I was married during the middle of in my backyard with my greyhounds. So anyhow, it's just always nice to be reminded that these type of atmospheric anomalies are actually sometimes a harbinger of good things. So I'm here to give you the developer's perspective this morning. So great to see so many faces in the room who've been working together with me and all of us for over a decade to help bring offshore wind to fruition here for New Jersey. My background has been with a variety of different developers, and I wanted today just share with you a little bit about the perspective of what stakeholders are, who they are, how we value them coming from a developer's perspective. I'm going to start out just by teeing up a little bit of information about my company, what we do, and how we've done things. That's primarily been in Europe. As was mentioned earlier, many of the developers are now coming here to the U.S. to help recognize this potential for offshore wind. I mean, I think at the key of the question about, we had such great presentations. Scott, I barely need to do any introduction after Scott's great presentation about offshore wind and why it's important, and Anne Marie's comments about, the health benefits. I mean, the benefits are astounding when it comes to offshore wind. So, really the question comes down to, why hasn't it happened yet? you know, I can imagine, I see all the little thought bubbles above your heads as these presentations are going on. Well, if they've been doing it in Europe for almost 30 years, why are we not doing it yet here in the US, right? So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. All the stakeholders that are involved in the matrix of developing an offshore wind farm. On the map now, you'll see the offshore overview for the projects that we have been or currently developing in Europe. The main central map are those projects in Europe. Across the nation, across the world, we've now built 25 wind farms. We have some that are in construction, some that are in development. And you'll see our two, kind of new markets on the top, North America and Asia Pacific. Those are the two markets we're currently really expanding into right now and focusing on. We have a little healthy internal competition on who's going to have the first wind farm, Asia Pacific or the US, and I'm vying for New Jersey, as you might imagine. So I'm going to go in a little bit more into the company portfolio, but I think it's important to be thinking about this context as we get to that stakeholder piece, right? Why have we not done this in the US? And talk a little bit about the stakeholder dynamic that influences that. I don't really need to say a lot about this because Scott did such a great job talking about why we want to do this here in New Jersey and why we want to do this work in the region. We have a huge electricity demand on the East Coast, that corridor from kind of Boston to DC, the Route 95 corridor, huge demand. We have a world-class offshore wind resource. And from a developer who's been doing this for nearly 30 years, I just want to repeat that. We have a world-class offshore wind resource, right? The Rutgers team can tell you all about how excellent the wind speeds and consistency is offshore to build these wind farms. And we have a very large, buildable continental shelf. And I guess one thing that I would layer over all these three things from a developer's perspective, because we're always thinking about the markets, is in New Jersey, we are paying some of the highest cost of electricity in the nation. Offshore wind is more expensive to build than traditional generation right now, right? So when you're thinking about what people are already paying and what they'll have to pay for offshore wind and that margin, then it's a smaller delta and a smaller hurdle if folks are already paying higher electricity rates. So that's kind of the backdrop of the market that I would layer on to this this perspective here. In the U.S., we are really looking at clusters of development. No longer are we really just talking about one state. We're not just talking about New Jersey. We're talking about the Mid-Atlantic region. Recently, we had the opportunity to acquire Deepwater Wind, a US-based developer who built the Block Island wind farm, the only wind farm in the US now, 5 turbines off the coast of Block Island, Rhode Island. So now that we've begun to merge our assets, our US portfolio looks a little like this, which is really exciting. Now, on the map, we have our projects that are being developed by our partners, like the one in Virginia, where we're partnered with Dominion Energy. We're building 2 turbines there. Construction starts in a couple months. That will be a gateway, we hope, to a larger project off the coast of Virginia. Our competitors' projects are also labeled on this map, as well as new leased areas that we expect to see available coming in the next months, an opportunity to bid on those new lease areas. So we are excited about really this entire region, the cluster of opportunity for development. In New Jersey, the project that we've proposed is called the Ocean Wind Project. It's located at its closest point, 15 miles from the coast of Atlantic City. And in the entire lease area, which you'll see here, let me see if I can do this light show thing. How do you do? Side thing, other thing, thank you. Just so it's clear, this is our entire lease area off the coast of New Jersey. The way it works is once you get further than 3 miles from shore, the offshore area is controlled by the federal government. That's an agency called the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. We obtained a lease from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and that's what you see in this blue polygon. We could talk a lot about stakeholders and why the shape of this thing is that strange, right? And maybe we will talk about that in a moment. That lease area has the potential for 3,500 megawatts of capacity, which is essentially the entire New Jersey state goal by 2030. We would love to build all the offshore wind for New Jersey out of that lease area, and that's certainly one of our stated goals. Beautiful water depths here, 65 to 100 feet. As Scott mentioned, we have this really gently sloping shelf, so really traditional basic construction techniques are used. In fact, when we talk to the folks of the Gulf of Mexico, they laugh because they say, 100 feet of water, they're building platforms in thousands of feet of water in the Gulf of Mexico for oil platforms. So this is all very reasonable and very much accomplishable. This is very typical for the type of construction we've been doing in Europe. So we're looking forward to bringing that here to New Jersey. 500,000 homes to serve in New Jersey with our proposal to the BPU. We've proposed up to 1,100 megawatts, which was the limit in this current solicitation. We submitted our proposal to the BPU. That was back in December. We have 2 other competitors who are also proposing, and we're going to find out in about 6 to 8 weeks. So I'm a little on edge about if our proposal was accepted, and you'll be hearing more in the news, hopefully, about who was successful. And it's quite possible that all 3 developers could be successful in this round, that we all have one piece of the opportunity to develop the up to 1,100 megawatts in this solicitation round. We will have several thousand construction jobs in the state. One thing we haven't really touched on much yet is the tremendous economic development opportunity that exists for New Jersey. I saw folks from EDA in the room here. We're talking about choosing New Jersey. Well, I mean, for us, it's past tense. We've already chosen New Jersey. We've been working in New Jersey for 3 years. We opened our full-time office in Atlantic City a year ago in 2 weeks. So we have chosen New Jersey, and we're really excited to bring the economic development, the construction jobs, the permanent jobs once the wind farm is built, right to this state. The Ocean Wind Pro New Jersey Trust is an up to $15 million granting program that we've proposed as part of our application. If we're awarded by the BPU, we would make that money available for existing companies that have a product or a service that want to essentially retrofit or retro tool that service or product to service the offshore wind industry. What's really important to us is that we have an opportunity to grow the supply chain. That's how we bring costs down, that's how we've done it in Europe, and that's how we really ingratiate the stakeholder community at its base when we're creating those jobs and having the people in the community working with and for us. So that's one thing we're really excited about. And the partnerships with universities and research organizations really run an endless amount of opportunity. And I'll talk a little bit about the work we've been doing with Rutgers to date and things that we hope to continue to do as we develop the projects. One thing that's key to understanding our need and desire to have a strong stakeholder development hold is this concept of how we build our projects. It's an end-to-end business model. Okay, so some companies will build a project and then sell it. Some companies develop an area, then sell the site. We do everything start to finish. In fact, we've not only built the world's first wind farm, but we decommissioned the world's first wind farm. That was Vindeby off the coast of Denmark. We did that last year. That was our first wind farm that we built in 1991, and we now have decommissioned that project. We did that ourselves, and we recycled all the materials that came out of that, including a turbine in our lobby in Copenhagen, which is really cool if you ever get a chance to stop and see us. So the end-to-end business model is really important to us. We are developing projects, so that's, when we are a wind farm developer, and this is our development stage in New Jersey. For Ocean Wind, we're figuring out where we're doing surveys to figure out where we're going to put the turbines, where we're going to run the cable routes. We're working with stakeholders. We're working to get our our long-term contracts to finance the projects. So that's the first stage. Second, we build the project, and that's what we hope to start doing in the mid-2020s here in New Jersey with our Ocean Wind project. We'll then operate the project for 25 to 30 years, depending on how the finances and technology work, but that's the expected life of a wind farm before we either repower it or decommission it, depending on the foundations and other factors. And then, as I mentioned, we're owning these projects. We're always at least a 50% owner of all of the projects that we've built, and we're really proud of that. And that is really, I think, the hook to what it means to have this strong sense for stakeholder engagement in the communities, because we're going to be there for a long time. At the heart of what we do is environmental stewardship. We recently transformed our company about 18 months ago. And I'll tell you a little story about how and why we did that. Our company, I think I mentioned earlier, we're based in Copenhagen. I may have forgot to say that. But so we're a Danish-based company. And the former name of our company was Danish Oil and Natural Gas. Okay? Unfortunate acronym. Wait for it, right? All right, so for a lot of good reasons, we changed the name of our company, but not just because we wanted a better name. We changed because we were changing the culture of our company. We transformed our company from an oil and gas company to a clean, renewable, green company, and our mission is to have a world that runs entirely on clean energy. We are divesting all of our oil and gas assets, and we will have done that completely by the year 2023. It's been a major transformation for our company, and I'll tell you that our profits have been better than ever. So there is money to be made in this sector. Companies are coming here because it's a strong, powerful opportunity, and we are really happy to be doing it in New Jersey. But that was my first point, the clean energy part. Secondly, it's the collaboration and coexistence with existing communities. There are a whole host of ocean users out there, in addition to the gliders, right? There's a ton of other things going on. There's fishing and shipping and so many marine users. You know, when you look out at the ocean, maybe you wouldn't think there are so many marine users out there when you're sitting at the beach, but the ocean water column, and it's all just full of things that have already existed there, and we have to figure out how, as developers, we're going to be putting the first large stationary items out in the ocean where that has never been done, right? And so that's really triggered an exciting opportunity for ocean and coastal planning, something that hasn't really been done in depth before, something that includes a large stakeholder participation role. I see Carl here from the Mid-Atlantic Data Portal team. If you have a chance, take a moment and Google the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal. It's kind of like Google Maps for the ocean, right? And how you can look at all this really interesting layers of information about what's happening in the ocean, where the shipping channels are, where people are fishing, and I would imagine some, information about temperature or data and things like that as well. So I should have said earlier that I'm not a scientist, right? So I stand before you very humble. I am a graduate of Rutgers, and funny thing, I went to the dean of the school where I was attending, and I said, what is the major I could have where I could take the fewest amount of math and science classes? And they said journalism. I said, okay, sign me up, So anyway, so I don't pretend to be a scientist, but that all to be said, there's a lot of important data and facts going on, and we using the things like the portal, a really powerful program. We do have scientists on staff, fortunately for me. In fact, we have a dedicated marine biologist who works exclusively trying to understand how we can best mitigate any potential impacts to marine mammals as they migrate up and down the coast from construction, right? There's a lot of noise. These are large industrial projects. How do we figure out how best to build these in concert with the existing environment? We have a local fishing liaison that we've brought onto our team. Fishermen are one of the lifebloods of New Jersey, historically fishing off the coast in both the recreational and commercial capacity for hundreds of years, literally. Existing ocean users need to be respected. And for me, that's kind of like what stakeholder engagement is all about. Is that my clock?
No.
Okay. Does someone know how much time I have?
Yeah, you're doing great.
Okay. I just have like 2 slides left, and we're going to talk about stakeholders. Okay, thank you. Okay. So some of the basic stakeholder engagement principles that we come from, and I tell you, I've worked for a bunch of different developers over the years, for about 15 years now, and one of the reasons I was most excited to go to Ørsted is because it was the first time I actually saw a developer saying, we want someone to manage stakeholder engagement. We have a stakeholder engagement team. This is not just something we do by accident. This is not something we do as a secondary function of government relations or whatever. This is actually dedicated to this such important opportunity to connect with people, connect with communities, understand what their issues are, and understand that it's as much about culling supporters as it is about quelling opposition. And that's why we've been working in New Jersey for almost 3 years now, the Ørsted team has. And it's really exciting for us to be in front of you and to have these opportunities like today. So we have a strategy that tries to balance both of those facets, right? So it's people coming at us with questions regarding, how much will it cost? And will we see it? And, will it be a problem for birds? As much as all, the folks in the room today who I see the excitement, thinking, wow, this is this great new opportunity for New Jersey. How do we capture your energy, no pun intended, and bring that with us as we develop the projects, as we go through our public process reviews? How do we keep you with us? And that's one of the goals that we feel very strongly about with our stakeholder engagement opportunities. Sometimes we're as much looking to get to neutral. There are some stakeholders that will never be supportive of our offshore wind projects. I'm not so naive as I was when I first started this to think that that's the case. I used to think that, everyone's going to love this, right? It's so great. Who wouldn't love this? So I don't think that anymore. But I do think that there's an opportunity to at least allow coexistence to happen in a neutral space, right? We don't all have to totally love what each other are doing, but we can do it in a way that hopefully makes our projects compatible with the existing ocean uses. The areas of stakeholder sensitivity that we see kind of most predominantly are viewshed impacts, the issue around cost, the impacts to existing ocean users, potential environmental issues, and issues with our local landfall and cable locations. I want to take a moment to just talk briefly about each one of these things, and then maybe there's an opportunity for us just to go a little back and forth on a couple things, all right? Viewshed. Our ocean wind lease area, that blue polygon that I showed earlier, that is about 10 miles from shore, okay? That lease area is about 10 miles from shore. When we started thinking about where we were going to put the turbines, we electively took it 15 miles. Because we knew that moving it further offshore would have less of an impact to the beaches, the tourism, and such. I also just want to mention that the University of Rhode Island just finished a large study of tourism and the Block Island wind farm. This is just one anecdote, so I don't want to paint this whole picture, but I do want to say that there is an opportunity for increased tourism with offshore wind. The University of Rhode Island found post a Block Island wind farm, their last 2 tourist seasons have been 2 of the largest tourism seasons in the island's history on Block Island. And I'm not saying it's all about our 5 turbines, but I'm saying, let's look at the correlation and the opportunities that are around that. So what we did, we took the project, we moved it to 15 miles offshore. Really at that point, the project being barely noticeable from shore. Right now, we're in the process of figuring out what the actual wind farm will look like. Once we find out about the award from the BPU, which we expect in July, we can actually do the modeling. In fact, we're required to model exactly what the wind farm will look like offshore. So stay tuned. We'll have more, visual representation of what that will look like as we understand how much capacity we're awarded off the coast. The issues around cost are ones that we never run from, because we know that this type of energy and any type of new energy tends to be more expensive at first. We do know that in Europe, over the past 6 years, we've driven down the cost of offshore wind by over 60%. I'm going to say that again. 6 years, 60% cost reduction in Europe. We've done that through our supply chain that I talked about earlier. That's about that pro-New Jersey trust, training local companies and bringing jobs and supply chain with us as we do. It's about scale. It's about building wind farms in the largest scale that's practicable. And that's what we've done at Ørsted. We want to do that for New Jersey and build the 1,100 megawatts. We know that by doing that, we can contract volume with our suppliers. And you know how that works, right? You buy in bulk, the costs come down. So those are our goals for the state, is really to see the costs start driving down. In fact, we saw in Massachusetts power purchase agreements at under 9 cents per kilowatt hour. That is really exciting. Who knows how we'll turn out for New Jersey? You'll all know soon how we'll turn out for New Jersey. That's still confidential information with the BPU. We'll find out in a few months what the numbers look like and be excited to share with you that. In terms of the impacts to existing ocean users, one thing that we tried to get out early, and I see one of my compatriots, Steve Drew, in the room from Equinor, who also works very closely with the commercial fishing community, is to really understand what the existing practices are. I did go to school for journalism, right? What the existing practices are, and then orient the turbines in a way that would have the least amount of impact to those existing uses. Our turbines will be located about a mile apart from each other. And so, some fishermen will be able to fish around, inside the wind farm. Some will fish around the perimeter of the wind farm. We know that the foundations create artificial reefs, which then stimulate additional fish to populate in the area. That spillover effect is something that's documented. So we hope that the general abundance of fish is greater in the area, and we'll be doing studies to understand the extent to which we see that. In the recreational community, we've started to understand what some of the concerns are from the recreational fishing community. I will say that there is a bit of a double-edged sword with early stakeholder engagement like we're doing, right? Because we don't have all the details of our project yet. And so when we go out to talk to recreational commercial fishing groups, we don't know, for example, exactly where the cable is going that will connect our wind farm to shore, because we're still doing geological and geophysical surveys to understand that. But sometimes stakeholders want the perfect information so that they can make an assessment of the project. So there's another principle that's this constant push and pull, where we want to talk to people early because we're so excited, and we want to hear about what you have to say so that we can design a project that works for everyone. But at the same time, we don't know everything. And that's what I like to say early in the presentation, is that, right, we don't know everything. So we're going to take you along for the ride with us and help us design the wind farm as a partner. So that's what, with the existing ocean users, what we've been doing, including the shipping and other maritime uses. There's a lot of shipping traffic in the coastal area, tug and barge traffic. Maybe you've seen it on a beach day, on a clear day. So we want to avoid those shipping corridors as well. And we're working with Coast Guard to do a risk assessment to figure out what those corridors look like and how we can avoid them. With the environmental issues, marine mammals are paramount. Scott mentioned earlier the North Atlantic right whale. There are under 400 individual North Atlantic right whales now in the world, right? And they exist all the way from the tropical areas in the Atlantic, and then they come up to see us in the summertime. We want to make sure that our construction practices are not hurting or injuring marine mammals, and so we're working closely on that. Avian and bat species, been engaging with the Audubon Society, again doing a risk assessment to understand how birds are moving. I noted a little earlier that strangely shaped polygon where our lease area is. Part of the reason it's shaped that way and part of the reason it's 10 miles offshore is because we heard from stakeholders and learned from the data that birds fly closer to shore, and the further offshore you go, the less activity you'll see. So that's another good reason for shifting wind farms offshore, in addition to the stronger wind speeds. So kind of, again, working with stakeholders to understand those principles and then figuring out how it works best to make it all work for us. I feel like the avian and bat story, I just want to say we're really committed to understanding the avian populations and their movement. We've been talking to New Jersey Audubon, giving them updates on our project. We, make sure that they understand each step of what we've been doing. Because we're moving the project offshore, we're not dismissing any of those potential impacts. I just want to make sure that's clear. We will be going through a full NEPA process. The National Environmental Policy Act requires us to provide information to the government where they will then provide an environmental impact statement. That EIS, as it's known, will be generated later this year for our Ocean Wind project. We'll submit 18 or 1900 pages to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. They will then use that information to develop this EIS. You'll see public scoping meetings available for this Ocean Wind project likely in August and September. And I would love it if you were all there and giving us your feedback, especially the feedback that helps us design the project in the best way it can be. Local impacts at landfall locations really have been, for our projects in the UK, some of the most challenging. And that is, where the cable makes landfall and, what streets it runs down. And it's a hyper-local issue. And we've now met with every mayor in Atlantic and Cape May counties to understand the political dynamic and the fabric there. We have people working in those local communities. We have our Atlantic City office that has dedicated staff to understand those local dynamics. That is an issue that, if all these things keeps me up at night, because it's one that's really hard to surmount. It's not one that you can do enough studies to get yourself around. And it's something that I would love for us all to be thinking critically about. How do we strategically incentivize and help people understand the global and larger benefits of offshore wind, so that when there is a local impact, like a cable that's buried in someone's street, that that can be surmounted because people are, they have a sense of the importance of this on a larger scale. So the last thing I just want to mention is the great work that we've enjoyed so far doing with Rutgers here. We have been working with their meteorological and oceanographic team on the data that has been mentioned earlier. That's absolutely world-class, phenomenal. We've had cross-ocean sharings between our office in Copenhagen and Scott's team here in New Brunswick. So that is already happening. We're right now scoping something to do a marine mammal acoustic monitoring program with the gliders that we've been talking about today. New materials for foundations. We've been talking with the material science team about how we can advance some of those things. And of course, stakeholder engagement, policy initiatives. I love this opportunity to collide with so many different folks today, and really hope that we can keep this conversation going. And thank you to Rutgers for having us here today. Thank you very much.
Kathleen here.
I'm so happy to be here.
Emit gratitude, but thank you.
Hi, everyone. Just looking around quickly, such an amazing group in this room, so many folks that we've been working with in the governor's office, at the departments. This is just such an exciting moment for offshore wind in New Jersey. And I know a lot of you in this room have been at this for quite some time in the state. When I started in the governor's office, a lot of people come in, introduce themselves, talk about their background and history, and I kept hearing people talk about their experiences with offshore wind in New Jersey and relate it to the age of their children, right? It would be the story of like, oh, my kid was born when OETA passed, and now, he's in middle school or whatever. And you could tell that it was this, kind of very kind of passionate debate. People who have been really believing in this industry, at it for a long time, felt like they really just didn't have the support they needed at the political level to be able to move forward for many years. And now the good news is we're back in a position with a governor and a leadership team at the state level who are committed, enthusiastic, and really all in on the offshore wind opportunity. But with kind of the note about folks who have been at this for a decade or more, there's folks, looking at a few here in the front of the room, that without their, kind of hard work and leadership and continuing to push the conversation during that kind of quiet period, if you will, we wouldn't be where we are today. So thank you to so many in this room who have been in the political sphere, in departments, here at Rutgers, obviously, other academic institutions. It's really due to your good work that we've been able to start moving forward as fast as we've been able to. So it's incredibly exciting. And just to say, I haven't been here for the morning's conversation, but I do know from the work in from the governor's team as well as the departments, just the multifaceted and excellent work going on here at Rutgers. I know certainly we've done a lot of interface with the Are You Cool group as well as the Rutgers Energy Institute, really cross-cutting work. Certainly on the climate resilience side, incredible effort that's been going on for the last several years, and our team is really well integrated with yours as we're working on our coastal resilience plan out of the DEP. So it's been wonderful to have that level of collaboration with Rutgers. We're lucky to have such expertise and skill here at the university, and in fact with so many higher ed partners around the state. So thank you for that. Thank you for being wonderful partners and just great leaders over many years. I just wanted to, and I won't take too long because I know we've got a good Q&A session teed up, but I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking through, from the Murphy administration's perspective, what we've done, where we are right now, and kind of what our key next steps are looking forward. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with a lot of this. Some of you maybe, kind of with pieces of it. So just to kind of level set and get us on the kind of on the same page, I thought I'd just walk through a few things. I think most of you probably know that from the early days of his campaign, Governor Murphy has laid out climate change and clean energy as key agenda items. And coming in the door, I think it was probably within our first 2 weeks of the administration, the governor signed Executive Order 7, which was one of our first big climate change moments, directing DEP to begin the work to re-enter RGGI, of course. And that EO included a strong focus on environmental justice, which I think many of you know is a key element of the governor's agenda in this area. And it's been, it's been work like everything, but DEP is getting, I think, close to the point that we'll be able to finalize the 2 RGGI rules, and that'll put us in a position to be able to formally re-enter RGGI, which we're hoping will be sometime this summer. And I know that will feel like a full circle exercise for a lot of folks in this room, but we're really looking forward to it, looking forward to being in a position to collaborate with sister states in reducing emissions, and also think thoughtfully in an interagency way about how to dedicate the revenues, auction revenues from RGGI to ensure that they're best put to work to advance our clean energy and climate change goals. Also, very early days, we joined the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is a really impressive and well-organized group of states that's working to advance the climate agenda in the U.S. This group was formed after President Trump pulled us out of the Paris Accord, and it was kind of a group that came together and basically said, we're still in, and as states, we commit to meeting the Paris goals. And I know that's just been a really exciting venue for sharing of information, sharing of ideas, successful programs in individual states and how those can translate to other locations and other geographies. And we have found that to be incredibly helpful in trying to move forward in the quick way that we have in our team. One other climate item broadly that I just wanted to highlight, I mentioned earlier, the coastal resilience planning effort that's being led by DEP, but again is very much an interagency process. There have obviously been so many folks in the state, led by a strong team here at Rutgers, obviously, that have been trying to build on kind of the experience and growth at the community level that developed in the wake of Superstorm Sandy. We know a lot of that has been going on. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we do want to bring the state to the table as a full partner in both those kind of resilience kind of response as well as planning efforts going forward. You know, that's a key priority for DEP, and there's kind of much more to come in the next couple months with regard to resilience and planning across the board. So those are just a few, you know, broader climate highlights of among many. Let me just spend a few minutes, given the topic of this gathering, specifically on offshore wind. I think you all probably know that offshore wind is a critical component of the governor's climate and clean energy agenda. I mentioned that during the campaign, he kind of came out early with a bold commitment of 3,500 megawatts by 2030. It's for a while stood as the most aggressive goal nationally. We have been a little disappointed. Well, I don't know, thrilled to be eclipsed, but also, you know, feeling a little competitive. So we'll see how that progresses over time. But we are marching forward aggressively to move forward on that goal and make it a reality. I mentioned earlier, and I think you all know, that our kind of the authorizing legislation for this activity was signed in 2010. And so the good news for us is that there already was statutory authority to move forward quickly. And I think, while obviously it's disappointing that there wasn't action in those 8 years, but the fact that there was that kind of that authorization did enable us to move more quickly and get us to the point that we are today. And in fact, I think it was again right about the same time that he signed the RGGI EO, our Executive Order 8 was our offshore wind executive order, which directed the Board of Public Utilities to move forward aggressively to implement OETA. And they have really been off and running ever since. I'm sure many of you have been interacting with the excellent team over there. And it's really incredible to see what they've been able to advance in a little over a year. We've stood up an interagency effort kind of to make sure that all of the different components of state government are all in on offshore wind. So that involves, of course, BPU, DEP, but it's also our Economic Development Authority. It's our Department of Labor and Workforce Development, really making sure that kind of the full potential of offshore wind and the economic opportunities it presents are really harnessed at the state level. And their kind of final work product will be a strategic plan for offshore wind for New Jersey. But there's so many, kind of intermediate steps that are supporting that have been incredibly exciting. One thing I just highlight is that we've heard consistently from the offshore wind development community that one of the most important things that we can do is provide clear line of sight into what the pipeline for offshore wind development is going to look like in New Jersey. And so the governor set out the 3,500 megawatt goal, but we've tried to be even more specific about what our timeline and plan looks like in order to actually implement that goal. So BPU, as I think most of you know, has already opened the solicitation and accepted bids. And this all happened by the end of last year for the first 1,100 megawatts of that 3,500. And then the governor laid out a schedule to complete that 3,500 megawatt goal. So we'll do another 1,200 megawatt solicitation in 2020, and then the final 1,200 in 2022. And we're hoping that really provides the certainty to the market that will allow obviously developers, but also supply chain actors to come set up shop and feel confident about the longevity of this program and our long-term commitment in New Jersey. And I feel like if this event had happened about a month from now, we might have more news to share with regard to the solicitation, but the news will be BPUs to share in late June. So look for that. There'll be, we got some really exciting bids in the door from a number of different players, kind of a number of different iterations of options, really big proposals, smaller proposals, everything in between. So we're excited to see how that plays out and what the opportunity is for New Jersey. So I know everyone's kind of on pins and needles waiting for that news to break. Another component of this, obviously, is kind of the port infrastructure strategy, which we're also working diligently on. I'd say that kind of the lead players for that in our administration are, of course, the BPU, but also the EDA, really trying to really understand and be responsive to the kind of the needs and the guidance that we're hearing from key supply chain players. We're kind of working our way through this. The EDA issued a request for information I think it was last fall, to really find out from key industry players what they're looking for, what they need, how New Jersey can kind of come to the table and really help build out the offshore wind port infrastructure to support the supply chain. EDA also has a $100 million manufacturing tax credit program that is now open and active, and that's again intended to support offshore wind supply chain activities. That was a program that had previously existed, had lapsed, and was restarted through the Clean Energy Act that the governor signed about a year ago. And also another item I'd note that we've had fairly extensive conversations with Rutgers as well as a number of the other higher ed institutions in the state is that as part of the governor's economic development plan, which he rolled out last October, we announced our intent to develop the Wind Institute, one of these like acronyms that we struggled to come up with, but we decided Wind Innovation and New Development. And we've begun coordination with all of our higher ed institutions in the state, of course, including Rutgers, to kind of define exactly what that will look like and what the different roles for our research institutions, our community colleges, and kind of everything in between can be. We want this entity to serve as a state clearinghouse for education, research, innovation, and workforce training for the future of the offshore wind industry in New Jersey. And we're looking forward to setting up an advisory board with some key external folks from the research sector as well as industry, workforce, labor, to help us define that as we move forward. So stay tuned on that, and that's something that we'll look forward to a high degree of collaboration with Rutgers and other higher ed institutions on. A few other items I just wanted to flag for you guys, kind of a new development that the governor announced at the IPF Forum in New York, which I think was last month. We also just launched the New Jersey Offshore Wind Supply Chain Registry. This is an online portal where folks who are interested in participating in the offshore wind economy in New Jersey can find, kind of who's already in the state, who are the key players, who can folks partner with, purchase from, hoping to make kind of the some of the industry partnerships a little bit more easy and accessible than they might otherwise be when you're standing up a brand new industry like that. So we're excited about that and the opportunities for partnership that provides. One other item I just wanted to underscore is that while obviously we're incredibly excited about bringing offshore wind to New Jersey, making New Jersey really the epicenter of offshore wind on the East Coast and in the US, we want to see real supply chain development here. We see both a kind of this is part of the governor's economic growth agenda as well as his climate change and clean energy agenda. So we're really focused on New Jersey, but at the same time, we see incredible opportunities for partnership with states nearby. We've been having a lot of conversations with colleagues in New York State in particular, not only around obviously the BOEM, New York, New Jersey, BITE conversation. This is kind of the future upcoming lease sales discussion. That's obviously a hot topic in those rooms, but more broadly, we think it's important for New Jersey and New York as two states with really nation-leading goals with regard to offshore wind, a lot of shared priorities, to be thinking about this together, because we think that kind of New Jersey and New York can be individually stronger when we're working together, and to really showcase the opportunity for the kind of the Mid-Atlantic to be the locus of this activity on the East Coast. And so a lot of coordination happening there, which we think is really exciting and kind of strengthens our individual pitches when we're able to work together and highlight that level of coordination and kind of joint prioritization. So that kind of in a nutshell is a lot of what we've been up to, which feels exhausting to even say, never mind to have experienced over the last year and change. And just to say to this group, I know a lot of you work on clean energy, renewable energy issues, and topics more broadly. I'd just like to underscore that while obviously we are, full speed ahead on offshore wind, there are a number of other important priorities that the governor's emphasized since coming into office. He signed the Clean Energy Act just about a year ago, and there were a number of critical initiatives in there that we've been moving forward on. Just to note a few, BPU established for the first time in New Jersey a community solar program, which we're really excited about, and we see as a huge opportunity to bring renewable energy to some communities that haven't been able to access it in the past. So that's tremendously exciting. BPU is also working on what we kind of call like the solar transition process, which is aimed at really trying to stabilize the solar incentive program in New Jersey over the long haul and make sure it's sustainable and something that we can support going forward into the future, which is also very exciting. I know that Rutgers is working with BPU on a exciting energy storage report and study, which was also mandated by the Clean Energy Act, and that's really going to get us kind of focused and pointed in the right direction on how we move forward with battery storage in the state, and we're looking forward to that. One other item I'd note that is a little bit more recent, but when the governor rolled out his budget proposal back in February, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the fact that for many years during the last administration, there was a diversion of funds that were intended to go to clean energy priorities that were diverted for other unrelated uses. And so we're working to pull those funds back and make sure that they are able to advance the original intent. So we're going to be putting another $70 million, assuming that we're able to get our budget and move forward with that into clean energy programs at the BPU, which will be, just a huge help in advancing clean energy goals across the board. So that's obviously we're kind of in the midst of budget negotiations right now, but we're very excited about the opportunity to utilize our budget priorities to advance critical clean energy goals, as well as broader goals related to tax fairness, equity, and really growing the middle class in New Jersey. So with that, I'll stop talking. I think that we're going to do a kind of Q&A dialogue. Great. Happy to do it. And thank you for having me, and thank you for everything that you guys are doing. It's really great to be here.
Okay, so my job is going to be easy. So first off, I'm Kevin Lyons. I'm with the Rutgers Business School, and I'm also with the Rutgers Energy Institute. I'm one of the associate directors there as well. My particular area of interest and research is supply chain management. That's my department. So I think I heard supply chain management mentioned 150 times. So I will hold back on my questions to allow all of you to ask the questions that you want to ask of our panel. So you guys have been kind of relatively quiet, but now all that marination of information, which was brilliant, probably the best panel that we've assembled in the symposiums that we've been doing. So there's a lot of information. This project, as far as offshore wind, is real. So this is something that we can now talk about with a sense of not only urgency, but the fact that it's going to actually happen. And the cool thing is that you actually have 4 folks sitting in front of you who are on the forefront of us making this happen. So with that said, I'm going to immediately open it up to the floor. So between now and 12:15, you're going to be able to, in a sense, drag out of the folks in front of you as much information as you possibly can. So we want you to walk away with as much information as you possibly can. So we're going to open it up. First question, right there. Oh, actually, oh, sorry. There you go.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tara Lamont. I have a sort of a common question for Kathleen and another question for Kris. The two are entirely different issues. Williams Transco, which is an oil and gas company, is proposing a gas pipeline from the fracking field of Pennsylvania to New York. It's happening right now. DEP is going to be making a decision by June 5th whether to give them a permit. Government, this is a really bad project. The wetlands being destroyed. The gas is being pumped through 50-year-old pipelines without much testing. They're building a compressor station within a residential commercial area, which will emit all kinds of lethal gases based on 25-year-old reporting standards. Governor, this compressor station is 206. Governor Murphy's been silent. In fact, not quite silent. He was asked about it, and his answer was balls and strikes. I have no idea what that means. It's baseball. There's smoke and mirrors. He's been quiet. He's been sitting on the fence. This would be a good opportunity for him to put his money where his mouth is. This is a terrible project. It's an oil and gas company. It's a fossil fuel project, and he has done nothing to stop it. This is our last gasp, this entire Franklin Township. So that's my comment. You may or may not be aware of the project. If you can just get the message to him, that would be plenty.
And who you represent again?
Pardon?
Your name and who you represent?
Tara Lamont.
Okay.
Hi, this is on, okay. I am aware of the project. Thank you for raising it. I know that there's been a lot of public input on this process. In fact, the Department of Environmental Protection extended the public comment period to really make sure that there was an opportunity for as many folks who wanted to weigh in as possible to do so. I know that they are in the process right now of working through all those comments, so I don't have any level of update, but it is something that we are certainly aware of and tracking, and to the governor's balls and strikes comments, he does have a habit to use sports analogies, for better or worse. But I think he's just making the point that the DEP is doing its diligence, doing its work to be able to to make the decisions that it's required to based on kind of fact and statute and requirements. So just the way we do any kind of any other
Yes,
process.
this will be a test of his commitment, and that's what we're looking for. He really needs to put a moratorium so that green solutions for the issue green solutions could be developed. There are other solutions. This company has chosen what makes most profit. I'll follow up with my question for Kris. With the project off the Jersey Shore, what are you doing? Are you interested in energy storage connected to the project? I'm a WBE for an energy storage company, not battery, but I'm just curious as to whether you're partnering with someone. But I would imagine energy storage is critical for wind because of the variability.
Yeah, absolutely. We have deployed our first large-scale energy storage system in the UK for one of our projects, which is a 10-megawatt system. And for our Ocean Wind project, we haven't currently contemplated an energy storage system, but we have been ramping up that, the exploration of that for our company. We now do have an office that's dedicated to energy storage here in the U.S. So, perhaps we can talk afterwards, because this is the exact type of, pro-grant or trust program that this grant program we're talking about, providing the opportunities and incentivization for companies to retool their company to address offshore wind issues. So let's talk afterwards.
And real quick, as a clarification, the registry system that the state has, is that similar to the registry for the types of companies that Ohleth that you guys work with as well?
I missed your talk. So I'm not sure.
Yes, so we have this pro-grant or trust program would be implemented if we're awarded from the BPU, so we'll know that in about 6 weeks' time. There is also, separate and apart from that, the Economic Development Authority, New Jersey EDA, has a supply chain database registry. So I would suggest that you do that. There's folks from EDA here in the room. In fact, their new offshore wind lead is with us today. So definitely sign up for that, but that is a statewide initiative versus our company's personal registration. Yeah.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah, question for Kris. Two questions really. What's the expected capacity factor for that one project on the city? And the second part of the question is, the Jersey Shore is notoriously weak transmission system, so you would have to bulk that up significantly with pretty big power lines coming up north, so that would be a very tough road out. So if you could comment on that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, interesting. That's one reason, from New Jersey, so biased, but one of the reasons I love New Jersey is because we have some of the most informed stakeholders. Like, these are great questions, and things that are very salient to developing our projects. So your first question I've already forgotten, so remind me. Capacity factor. I'm so enthralled by the transmission question, I forgot the first one. So capacity factor. Right now, we, and I didn't mention it in the presentation, but we deployed 2 buoys off the coast of New Jersey that have LiDAR on them, so it's like sonar but with light technology. And those buoys are offshore now reading the wind speed data. That will help us understand what the capacity factor of the project will be. Once we know those speed outputs, we can then design a turbine that has a power curve that best meets that dynamic. So it's not yet known. We've been seeing capacity factors over 40% of our for our projects in Europe. So the bigger machines have really been helping the capacity factors rise. So that's another opportunity for us to bring costs down, like we talked about earlier. So that's one thing. And then the transmission, yeah, that's a great question. Depending on the size of the project we're awarded, we would plan to plug into one of the kind of existing coastal load centers. There's opportunities at Oyster Creek recently with the retirement of that plant, and certainly at BL England. All of those things are being considered by our company now. And once we find out, again, like Kathleen said, 6 weeks from now, this conversation is very different. But once we understand that, we'll have a sense of how much capacity we'll need and where we'll need to plug in. But right now, we're evaluating a variety of routes and what the upgrades would look like. But those areas are already considerably hardened because of the existing infrastructure.
Next. Oh.
Hi, Bill Durasmo from Troutman Sanders in DC. I guess first question for Kris. In terms of stakeholder outreach, how much time have you spent dealing with the PJM process? Get some feedback. And then the second question is, pardon the pun, but how much time have you all spent thinking about, in terms of supply chain, navigating the Jones Act issues?
Yeah, great. Again, super informed questions. On the PJM side, we have filed interconnection. So this is it sounds like you can get in the weeds, so I'll do this for you. Hopefully other folks can bear with us. But we have filed interconnection requests and are in the queue for our project in New Jersey for the Ocean Wind project, and that's publicly available information. We also have just been working with PJM as stakeholders in the offshore wind space for more than a decade to help them understand the issues around variability and the public policy goals that states have and how that feeds into the planning process at PJM. So we've been very engaged there. And I guess, because I'm tired of hearing myself talk, other thoughts on Jones Act? Or is that just a me question? I don't know.
PJM. Anything on PJM?
Anything on PJM? Just want to try and be collaborative here.
You have it all, Kris.
So on Jones Act, so there, and this is not my area of expertise, but there is something called the Jones Act, which ironically was making headlines during Hurricane Maria. Right? People really started seeing the Jones Act coming up in the press. And essentially that says, and it's a way for us to protect our own U.S. commerce opportunity, right? It says that it has to be a U.S. flagged vessel that's serving U.S.-based ports. And since a turbine, technically, and its foundation attached to the seabed, that in kind of U.S. law is considered a port. So if you want to have a vessel that services, for example, a port that's existing, like the port of Paulsboro, where a turbine could be, marshaled from, and take it out to, a foundation where you would put your turbine on top of, you would need a U.S. flagged vessel to do that. There are not any vessels in the U.S. currently that are large enough to build the turbines that we want to build on site. This goes back to, mention 151 of supply chain. How are we going to do that? And we've been exploring that as a company. We haven't made any public announcements yet, but are excited to tackle that challenge. We had creative solutions with the Block Island Wind Farm with a feeder barge system that you may be familiar with. So it's an important issue that we're looking very closely at, to say the least.
Hi, my name is Jim Walsh. I'm an energy policy analyst for Food and Water Watch. Thank you all for coming here today and for organizing this event. First, I would like to appreciate the efforts that Governor Murphy has taken to develop clean energy here in the state. It's a breath of fresh air from the previous administration, for sure. But given the urgency of the situation, we are sitting here listening to scientists tell us the extreme differences between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius, the biodiversity report that just came out from the United Nations. To give Governor Murphy a baseball analogy, we are in the final inning right now, and the count is full. We don't need somebody who's going to call balls and strikes. We need somebody who's going to lead. And I don't understand what's standing in the governor's way of saying that he will put an end to all fossil fuel infrastructure in the state, not just the Nessie pipeline, but the Meadowlands pipeline, the Pinelands pipeline. All of these different fossil fuel projects are going to stand in the way of the governor meeting his climate and energy goals. They are not consistent with each other. And so if you can talk about how we resolve those differences and bring that message back to the governor that he needs to put an end to these fossil fuel projects, that would be greatly appreciated.
No, I'm happy to, and look, that's a active conversation, obviously, between kind of DEP and our office, and your organization is an active part of a broader coalition that's advancing that, and there's a lot of ongoing dialogue there. So he's well aware of that. And I will certainly bring it back to him. But respectfully on the leadership question, like I said, the governor from the very earliest days of his campaign committed to some of the most aggressive, if not the most aggressive climate change and clean energy goals in the country. So I appreciate everything you are saying, and I assure you that every day these issues are top of mind for the governor and the leadership of his cabinet. And just to, and I only touched on some of the real highlights, but the work that's going on a day-to-day basis, again, not only at the DEP and the BPU, but also at places like the EDA, Labor and Workforce Development, Department of Education, which is trying to really ramp up education programming related to climate change so that kids coming through schools and curriculums in New Jersey can really understand some of the key facts and science that you're detailing. It really is a whole of government approach, and I think the leadership that he's exhibited is really tremendous. So
thank you for highlighting it and raising it, and I'll make sure that he hears again the priority that is placed on all of this. So thanks.
I'm going to take moderator rights on this and ask that our students, I know it's reading period time, and you're taking a little bit of a break, but I want to hear some questions, if possible, from our students as well, because when Anne-Marie was talking about the collaborations that they have with their students and all the great stuff that is happening, even at the undergraduate level, I'm hoping that you see yourself as part of the future of what's happening in this space. So I really would love, think about it for a couple minutes. Actually, I want some students to jump in if possible.
And you don't have to be an engineer?
You don't have to be an engineer. Questions?
I see one.
Dunbar, you're a student of life. So go ahead.
So I'm not a student. But give students time to think of questions. This is a kind of future-looking question that integrates facts that I learned from most of the talks. Thinking that 1% of PJM load created by this 3,500 seems like a really small number. And then I'm looking at the map of the region that was your lease region, and that looks like a small area. And then there's wind turbines that you're not even putting up to the edge of your lease region. And so I'm wondering about what are the prospects for future capacity added beyond the 3,500, obviously building on the supply chain that will be created to build these. How far out can we build from the lease territory that you have? All up and down the East Coast? Are we going to get to 50% wind power? What are the prospects into the longer term future?
So why don't I kind of speak from my vantage point, and then probably, I think several folks up here will have things to share. I'm not going to break any news related to this issue, but I think that we're, even in the couple years since the governor set out his original goal, I think, the question of capacity factors and really a better understanding of what the existing sites look like, do mean that there's, maybe more, kind of more to offer than even we understood at that point. I also mentioned the ongoing BOEM process with regard to the New York, New Jersey BITE, which is kind of the next opportunity in the near term to have some additional lease sales, and we're actively participating in that. And I think that you're going to see kind of an ongoing focus pushing BOEM for more lease sales, more opportunities going forward. So there's obviously little that we can do from the kind of state level to really drive that, but in terms of advocating, really kind of pushing for them to make more opportunities available, that's something that we and frankly in collaboration, I said with New York, but a number of other states are actively doing. But it's, it's kind of, I will tell you, it's an open point of discussion and dialogue within our administration for sure.
I would just add from a stakeholder perspective, we do need to consider all of the existing ocean uses, and that would preclude us from building them everywhere. And so we're going to balance, I think, the needs of other users and what we see, certainly being bullish on our, stance as a developer, but, balancing that as we build them out.
Scott, Anne-Marie, please.
I think the capacity to continue to build is there. When you go to these international partnering forums, you see the big increase in interest. And more and more lease areas every year. And you see that continued growth. You also understand that during this first 10-year phase, we are going to learn a lot. And those first 10 years are going to inform that future growth. So that's why it's a little bit hard to project beyond that, because there's so much that's going to be learned about the supply chain, but all the other stakeholders that are out there, we will learn a lot from that.
I don't have a whole lot more to add, but it's generally my observation that things like the start, small companies move in, they raise money, and then bigger companies see that there's this opportunity to make money, and then they come in, and then suddenly it happens. I don't see why this would be different.
I have a quick question for Anne-Marie. Have you gotten any interest from the insurance industry as far as the health aspects of the data that you're coming up with and the cost that you guys are modeling? I would think that that would be a really good, not only research investor, but have you actually seen any interest from that sector at all?
Yes.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to say.
Question here.
I was just wondering about the offshore wind farm. Are you actually planning to build it? Or are we just talking about?
Are you guys just actually build a wind farm or just talking about it?
I'll answer that.
Great question.
Yeah, that is our goal. As Kathleen mentioned, we're going to learn very soon if we have the award from the state to be able to do that. So we'll find out like in the next 6 weeks or so. You'll be seeing it in the newspaper, and our construction would start in concert with other developers should they also be awarded in mid-2020s on the New Jersey projects, God willing.
So who will own this wind farm? Your company owns this
In this case, so speaking from my company's perspective, we would own our own wind farm. There are other developers who are also proposing. There's a company just north of, that has the lease area just north of ours called Atlantic Shores. That is a joint program between Shell Oil Company and EDF Renewables. They own that lease area and they're developing that lease area together. I'm not sure of their ownership model. And then there's another company called Equinor who are buying to build a project off closer to Sandy Hook. And I'm not sure, I can't speak for them, but in our case, we would own the project.
Hi, Louis Kleiman from the Waterfront Alliance. I'd like to talk about, or ask questions about 3 different areas that you addressed before. The first is about job creations. Are there jobs built into the contract? Will they focus on New Jersey residents, and how will job training, in fact, be handled? The second is about the definition of stakeholders, and I think that's particularly important because the basic problems, I think, come about where those cables hit the ground and convincing those local communities of the importance of digging up their streets, as you alluded to before. And finally, the security of the areas themselves. How will it be handled? Who will be handling it? All those kinds of problems that will arise. Thank you.
So we got workforce, we have
Streets.
several issues built into the stakeholders as well.
Should I start?
Go ahead, Kris.
I'll start on that. So the first one was around workforce training and development. So to back up a little bit, I'm going to talk about what's known as the net economic benefit test. In New Jersey, we are a net economic benefit test state. So our project, as we propose it, has to prove that there are net economic benefits. Similarly, Maryland has adopted a program that was actually modeled off of the OETA legislation that we had originally signed in 2010. So anyhow, as part of our proposal to the BPU, we have proposed part of those economic benefits being job creation. So we have committed, and I can't speak specifically to numbers, but we have committed based on the award that we're given that size, that we would do that, so many jobs would be associated with the size of that project. So yes, we are actually, absolutely committed. We are also working with local community partners in Atlantic City right now to figure out how we can recruit and do job training. Again, this is a little somewhat premature because we're talking about construction that would start in a few years from now, but we are thinking about how we get training done. We did sign an MOU with the South Jersey trades, committing the project to union labor in South Jersey as well. So, we're starting to develop a strategy around workforce training and development, again, somewhat early.
Could I jump in on that?
Please.
And the community.
And just from our perspective at the state level, in the governor's economic plan that he released last fall, we identified a number of specific sectors that we see as real growth areas for New Jersey. Clean energy and specifically offshore wind is absolutely one of those. So we're working, kind of at the state level to stand up and develop workforce training, workforce development programs, often in collaboration with some of our county colleges and other, existing components of our workforce development system, obviously with a lot of labor partners, and looking forward to, kind of having the developer partners as well, clarified in about 6 weeks. But it's something that, we also feel like from a state government perspective that it's an area that we can really help support and emphasize, given that we do see this as a tremendous growth area for the state. So it's not, obviously the developers will play an important role here, but we see it as a place that we want to really put resources and emphasis as well.
Can I add?
Yeah.
Please. So one thing I think I'm observing is it seems like you're held to this double standard a little bit. There's an existing energy infrastructure and the security costs associated with that, for example, are not zero, right? The tank farms and permitting, we subsidize that security cost. And then, Kris, you did this really careful analysis of bird deaths. I was looking up the literature while you were talking, and the air pollution from fossil fuel combustion kills about 1 million birds a year, 500,000 sea mammals, and that's just air pollution, that's not oil spills. And so, I don't know, it just seems to me like I'm observing this double standard, and I wonder if you ever feel that way.
Never. Can't answer that. Thank you.
I have a question.
Thank you for
for
saying
a
that.
quick question for Scott and Amory as well, just a quick one. So as these projects are awarded and then the actual contractors go up and they're doing their developing out at sea, what happens with the research? Are you guys actually out there participating in any kind of way, still collecting information, whether or not your models are now proving out now that the actual wind turbines are out on shore and doing their thing, or do you sort of pack up your bags and sort of move on to the next project?
Actually, we hope it's the opposite, that we're out there even more, because there's even more reasons to be out there. There's also the availability of so many more platforms with which to observe. As I talked about earlier, it's very hard to be offshore. And so we have people now that will be working and living. There'll be, city-sized developments that are offshore that we can then use as platforms for observations. So it'll only increase. It'll increase our understanding of this environment.
Okay. Amory, anything?
Notoriously, the Weather Service has a really difficult time predicting winds off the coast. And then, so if Scott's out there making more measurements, those models will improve, not just for forecasts in New Jersey, but anywhere there's a coastline, which is where most people live globally.
Okay, great. A few more questions, and I'd love to get some.
Question for Kathleen.
Hi.
Shihab Karan of Power Edison. And my question's about energy storage. We worked together during the transition team and so on. And the governor announced a goal for energy storage of 600 megawatts in the state of New Jersey by 2021. Several stakeholders in the state, through public-private partnerships, private sector, and so on, geared up and started planning for that goal. In checking in Trenton with the commissioners, with staff, nothing's happening. Many of them would say, well, we are waiting on a priority signal from the governor's office. And then some would say, well, we're waiting on the study by Rutgers, which in fairness to the professors at Rutgers, that's a lot of pressure on them to solve a lot of things and come up with a comprehensive plan, which it can't be given the time and the scope and the money given to them. So with nothing happening, 2021 in the energy storage world is around the corner. In contrast, for example, in New York City, PPS has a target of 300 megawatts within the Con Edison service area by 2022, the year after. But programs, money, NYSERDA there's already laws, regulation, everything is in place, RFPs, RFIs, the whole industry is working in unison to make that happen. In contrast, here we have nothing happening other than pointing at the study from Rutgers. So how are we going to get to 600 megawatts of energy storage by 2021? And frankly, not much is happening now.
All right, maybe you just established my agenda for the afternoon. I think that, those are all kind of all fair points. Obviously, that that goal is something also that the governor set out during the campaign and was included in the Clean Energy Act. I didn't come today with full details, so let me go back and take the homework assignment and check in and see where we are, and I know how to find you. Thanks.
Katie, and then a student question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. So my name is Katie. I am a student. I don't have a question about supply chain, but Kathleen mentioned environmental justice earlier, and there's been a growing movement in environmental justice at Rutgers among students wanting to learn more and to do more around this. So I was wondering if you could talk more about the environmental justice implications of these projects, especially, I know Kris, you mentioned developing the cable lines through the streets. A lot of times when these big construction projects happen, people don't want it going down their street, and that ends up in marginalized communities.
I mean, let me just kind of kick off broadly by I think it was the governor. Some of my executive order numbers I have just off the tip of my tongue. I don't have this one, but it was on our first Earth Day in office, so just about a year ago. The governor issued an executive order related to environmental justice, which really underscored a lot of the commitments that he made during the campaign, and directed the DEP to really work closely with all of our departments to make sure that environmental justice concerns are integrated and considered across the board in all sorts of planning activities. And it's a very kind of like wonky internal process, but it's the sort of thing that, kind of as you watch the way it's manifested and plays out, and, I mean, time will tell, and everyone can kind of test us on this looking forward. But I think we feel we feel very good about the direction that we're going, and he's been incredibly clear about his emphasis on this. And I mentioned our community solar program that we're really proud of having very quickly stood up in the state, and I think that's that's really kind of a shining star for us of something we've been able to do concretely in the first year that focus us on really making sure that every community in New Jersey is able to benefit from renewable energy. We're incredibly excited about it, and we'll continue to seek every opportunity to prioritize the communities that are kind of both overburdened by pollution and disadvantaged in terms of their access to renewables. So kind of from a broad framing perspective, it's something that we're focused on, and particularly kind of DEP and working through the other agencies implementing every day.
Yeah, and from the specific siting, something that we didn't get to go into great detail on is that once we make landfall with our cable, we will be within the zone of permitting by the state, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Flowing down from the directive of the governor, their agency is very concerned about that type of siting. So right now we're in the process of working with DEP, the land use division, and ensuring that we're keeping all of those perspectives in mind, really from a philosophical standpoint as a company, because it's going back to that end-to-end model that I talked about earlier of being in communities for decades. It's very important to us that we do it the right way so that we're building long-term relationships. It's the right thing to do, but it also enables us to build projects successfully over time. So it really makes sense for us to do it that way.
Okay, we have one last question, and then we're going to break for lunch. So Rick, you have the floor.
Yeah, two things. What is the fraction of cost of a wind generation system in terms of the materials cost? And then the other question I will ask to the state is, have you thought about using this program as a way of bringing more manufacturing to the state to create jobs? And if so, how open is this project to innovation, for example, for reducing the ridiculous cost of the composites that are used in making these materials? So I'd like to hear some
materials first, and then Kathleen second.
So the short answer is I don't know that statistic off the top of my head, and I would hate to give you a wrong answer. So I'm gonna pass on answering that question, only because, again, I'm not a numbers person, but I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. I have like data on that on my laptop up there. It's just not. That's just a frank answer, so I just don't want to misquote, but we can talk about it. It's a substantial amount of developing a wind farm.
That's the point I wanted to make.
Yes, it's a substantial
and
amount.
I wanted her to
I can tell you a number afterwards.
Yeah. No, I think, the manufacturing question is a critical one. And, obviously we're seeing the early entrants in this space are largely European companies, kind of bringing their expertise over here to the U.S. We don't want it to just be their expertise that they're bringing. We want it to be kind of the manufacturing activities, the manufacturing jobs that can come along with that. And as you cite, the opportunities for innovation, R&D, technology development to bring the costs down of the entire program. We want to see all of that here in New Jersey. So,
but I don't understand how you're going to do that, because you're an assembly company. You put things together by having other people make parts. So how are you going to do that?
Yeah, we do that because our manufacturers want to be where we are, right? The supply chain follows us. We say it's X amount dollars cheaper if you're building that turbine for us in New Jersey as opposed to building it in Germany. So, because otherwise we have to ship the thing all the way over here. So, once we have enough volume that we talked about earlier, building at scale, we can then, give them enough incentive to bring the pipeline of manufacturing here to New Jersey. And that's really, what we're working with our suppliers to do. And the state's excellent commitments to like 3.5 gigawatts helps give a signal to the industry to say, yes, it's worth, building a multi-million-dollar plant here to generate that type of growth.
yeah, and just to my point, and that's why we've worked so hard to be clear about our timeline and our commitments. So the industry does have that sort of visibility, looking long term, to understand that there is a pipeline here. And to my point also about regional collaboration, obviously, we think all about New Jersey all day long, but to have other states nearby who are also making long-term commitments, I know that really helps, kind of drive the broader story and just increase the pipeline across the board, so people can really focus on the New Jersey, New York, and surrounding areas as a huge focal point. And when they think about where they want to make these investments, that will be really front of mind. So we see it as an exciting opportunity. I mentioned we do already have an existing manufacturing tax credit program on the books that's open for applicants today, and that's actually something that had been previously established, had lapsed. We reinstituted it as part of the Clean Energy Act. So it's something that is front of mind not only for our administration, but for legislators as well, in looking to bring that kind of that long-term growth and economic potential to the state. So we're very focused on it.
Okay. Anything else from?
No.
Clean manufacturing, clean production, air particulates, anything? Okay.
No.
That is it for the panel. Now we're going to break for lunch, so let's give a hand for